This is the Sound Squatch Podcast. Stand out from the crowd and live a more successful life through the use of creative audio. Now your host, me. My name's Ian Sturgeon, and I am the host of this show, and I'm also the founder and creator of SoundSquatch.com, a place where you can go and download all the music and effects you need for any of the projects you need and use them anywhere all across the internet or the airwaves. Today we're going to be talking about voiceover and how to EQ it and compress it. And we're going to be talking in really broad strokes because, like I said in previous episodes, we have no idea what program you're using, but it can set you on the right path to figuring out what you're doing inside of your program of choice. All right? So here's the deal. When we first start doing voiceover, I think the pitfall is that we want a big, like movie trailer sounding voice or whatever. And so before you know what you're doing, you may make the mistake of using your EQ settings to boost up the lower levels of your voiceover. But here's what that ends up sounding like.
This is the Sound Squatch Podcast.
So the problem here is that you've got a lot of low sounds in your voice that the human ear doesn't really care about or pay attention to. And those low sounds are making your voiceover louder, right? So when we go into our graphic equalizer or whatever equalizer you're using and we turn up those lower frequencies, it's going to add a bunch of gain to the overall volume of the voiceover we're working with, all right? So what we're going to do here is instead of boosting up the frequencies, those lower frequencies that the human ear can't hear anyway, we're going to actually take those out of the voiceover before we start raising the volume of it and adding compression or anything like that.
This is the Sound Squatch Podcast.
All right, so now that you've done that, you're going to notice that it's actually taken some of the volume out of your voice, right? It's quieter now, and the little waves on your screen are shorter now, right? So that's a good thing because now we have the part of your voiceover that the human ear can actually even hear. And so now that we've got those, we can boost those levels up. So the first thing we could do is just normalize those levels, and it's already going to sound better. So this is what that would sound like.
This is the Sound Squatch Podcast.
Which already sounds better than...
This is the Sound Squatch Podcast.
But what's really going to make your voiceover sound cool is some sort of compression setting. So I don't know what program you're using, so I can't really coach you through that. But just suffice it to say that you're going to have to look around inside your program and find some settings that will help you limit the higher levels, the peaks of your voiceover, and bring up the lower levels, the nuances of your voice, so everything is easy to hear and not so loud it's distorting, all right? So we can't just turn up the levels, we have to limit the peaks and boost up the valleys, okay? So this is what that would sound like.
This is the Sound Squatch Podcast.
And like I said, you're just going to have to click around inside your program of choice and mess around with some presets and kind of find the right path and figure out what sounds good in your editing program of choice. All right? So there's that. I would also say that you can mess around with these settings and this technique to various extremes, right? So you can use your EQ settings to take more and more and more lows out of your voice and your compression settings to compress that audio more and more and more. And the more you do that and the more you mess around with these two extremes, it's going to sound more and more aggressive until you get to a point where it just sounds stupid, okay? But here's a bit more of an aggressive version of what I'm talking about.
This is the Sound Squatch Podcast. So there you have it, just a few different ideas of how you can use EQ and compression to make your voiceover sound a lot cooler. That's it for today. If you need any more sound effects or music beds, you can find those at soundsquatch.com. Have a good one.
Thanks for listening to the Sound Squatch Podcast. Download free sound design and see what else the Sound Squatch has to offer at soundsquatch.com.